Welcome back, all you music lovers, to another exciting edition of Battle of the Ballads with Gregory, Joseph, myself, and special guest this week, Ellen Sadler. Ellen, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me, gentlemen.
Prior to recording here, I mentioned that Ellen may be the only person that listens to our episodes all the way through, and we greatly appreciate that.
Now that she's on an episode, we're going to get 0 people watch this one all the way through.
Yeah, because I definitely don't. I don't watch them all the way through, so I watch like 15 seconds.
So, Ellen, we're going to need your parents to also log on and watch them all the way through for this episode as well, and coworkers. And while you're watching them, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. Make sure you subscribe so you get our updates every week. I know that we were off for a couple weeks, which seemed to screw with the algorithm a little bit for sharing, but we're going to get right back on track now. While you're at it, check out the shorts on my YouTube page. They are actually, the page that this is on, they're actually getting a lot of watches and traction, and we might do a couple of our own for that. So
would you like those people to salute those shorts, Dan?
Yes. And
well done.
What's that?
I was just saying, well done.
Joe is my biggest fan, which is really nice.
You know, we ventured in 2004 and we actually got a few new commenters, which is really cool. It took us to some different genres, some songs that wouldn't typically be named. Ellen, you typically give us a nice list, but you're here tonight to share yours in person, so that's wonderful. So I'm going to just go down those. We had Ali Abdul Adil. He gave us Boulevard of Broken Dreams by Green Day because it doesn't matter who you ask, they know the song, which is pretty accurate.
Yeah, but the song's garbo.
My Aunt Dawn gave us Live Like You Were Dying from Tim McGraw, which was actually very timely at that time. She said she knows she'd get roasted, but she had to say it because it's meant a lot to her. And I actually love those songs, you know, for people. Charlene said, "Ooh, the year I graduated high school," which I think for many of the people who do check out our show, that is the time frame as well. She gave us Gwen Stefani, What You Waiting For, and Rich Girl. What You Waiting For was amazing in Smallville, by the way. Great Clark Kent scene, dancing with witches. Keen, Somewhere Only We Know. But the long-lasting hits were Usher, Yeah, Kelly Clarkson, Since You've Been Gone, and The Killers, Mr. Brightside, which I forgot that this was The Killers' year, and they absolutely took over the airwaves. And
there is no such thing as The Killers' year because that album is still on the charts in the UK. So.
It's a masterpiece. Paul Brenner, who's heading back on tour with Joywave, gave us The Killers' Hot Fuss from 2004. The album's perfect. Also, Britney's Toxic. That song rules. I've actually enjoyed a lot of covers of that song, like acoustic and punk versions and stuff. It's a very transcending song. And friend of the show, Tony D. Romanis, he gave us one. He said it's a very personal one for him because he was deployed in Afghanistan at the time, and he was missing his kids and going through the beginning stages of his divorce and just a lot of stuff going on for him at the time. But if you've listened to Tony on our show, you know his style of music, and he went with Slither from Velvet Revolver. He loves that STP and Guns N' Roses got together and made something really interesting. And they also won a Grammy for it. And he said that's hugely impressive. And to be honest, check out my Facebook for the full comment. It's a great story that he shared with us. Really love it for the guy that he's got that song. And James Earl Jones gave us So Cold from Breaking Benjamin. And I forgot how much I love that song until I went and listened to it repeatedly. So a lot of new people commenting. That was really cool. Tony, thank you again for your plug there of what your experience at the time with that song meant for you. Same thing at Dawn. I love those stories for folks. That's what connects us all to music in our own way. Gregory and Joseph has shared a lot of those on here as well from their childhood and different moments. And I think that's what makes music so special. And speaking of special, band debuts for many bands are quite special to them and get them some attention and some love on the airwaves. And Gregory kind of became our expert in what came out in each year. So Gregory, what's our 2004 look like?
Well, before we get into debuts, just real quick, rest in peace to one of the funniest, most original comedians who ever lived, Norm Macdonald. Yeah, it's insane, but also Anthony Jeselnik tweeted out, and I think it was perfect, that hiding the fact that he was battling cancer for 9 years is the most Norm Macdonald thing in the world. So like, yeah. And I know his friends and family have to be completely shocked since it was basically his producing partner that knew it. That was it. But honestly, like Norm, I think genius is used too much, especially in this day and age, but Norm really was a genius. And if you need any further proof, the roast of Bob Saget, when everyone went extra filthy because it's Bob Saget, but Norm did like the weirdest, corniest, like clean roast ever. And there's a reason only the comedians were laughing in the crowd, because it was just such a high level thing that only Norm Macdonald would think about doing. So honestly, pick any appearance on Letterman or Conan and rewatch it. Norm was brilliant. So the world, and especially the comedy world, big loss today.
She just went back and rewatched the moth joke on Conan, and like I even know the punchline, right? It's not like a well like hidden joke or anything, and I'm laughing the entire time because his delivery of the moth joke is just so perfect.
And as we talk about albums and things like that, definitely check out his Ridiculous album. It was very well done and an amazing comedy album. I don't really do songs typically, but amazing comedy album. Definitely check it out and give him some love in the afterlife.
Yeah, just a brilliant guy. And there's no way to pivot from that. But Ellen, I have a question for you. Why 2004? You picked to come on to 2004, like back when we were on 91. So why this year?
I did. Well, when Dan first, invited me, I was like, I don't know what year. There's some to choose from. So I was trying to think of times in my life when I was really getting into music, and part of that thinking about what artists I was listening to over the years. So in looking at like 2002, 2003, 2004, 2005, I picked 2004 because I looked in my own like CD collection, which I still have, don't use. I was like, wow, I've got a lot of gems here from that year. So, and then doing some more research about what songs are coming out, I was like, this was a fun year. So
what's your shirt say? It says, win your song what?
This is a Mandalorian shirt. It says,
I love it.
I thought
Grogu, amazing.
Okay, so I just wanted to make sure there wasn't a song that was like perfectly meaningful to you this year. It was just like general music overall that got you into this year that made you want to come.
She actually picked a year without Celine.
Yeah, that's.
I did see she released like her album Miracle, which was, I think, something to do with Annie, was it Leibovitz, the famous
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, because there was like a photo book that was with it too, right?
Yes. Yeah, I remember that. Yeah.
Yeah, just because Joe and I were talking in 2004, not a year that really hit hard for either of us. So,
but maybe hit hard for Melon. Let's see where we go with this.
Yeah,
we'll find out.
Debuts though, there were quite a few. Bayside, Scissor Sisters, Franz Ferdinand, because like Franz Ferdinand and the Killers like exploded on the scene about the same time. So it was like, who would have known the Killers would have pulled so far away? Kanye West ruined his career by leaving behind the production and going behind the mic.
He furthered his career that year and then ruined his career with every subsequent release after that.
I didn't like this album. I did not like Kanye as a rapper from the beginning. But Chromeo, TV on the Radio, which I have to admit, I love the next two albums. I've never listened to the TV on the Radio debut album, which is kind of insane because Return to the Cookie Mountain and Science are just like brilliant albums. The whole
We have a frozen Gregory.
So I can hear him still speaking through the floor. So I don't think he realizes he's frozen yet.
Oh no.
So what's he saying, Jeff?
I can't hear it that well because I'm wearing my headphones too. I just could tell that he is speaking.
Oh, Gregory.
Let me yell and see if you can.
I like the dramatic pause here that we're getting. Jumping back in.
Technology.
We have two Gregorys and we're going to keep the frozen one.
Okay, yeah, I could hear you guys. Looks like the other one of B disappeared.
So I wanted to be.
Where did you guys lose me?
After your second one.
Okay, so Scissor Sisters, Franz Ferdinand, Kanye West, Chromeo, TV on the Radio, The Hold Steady, William Hung. That was a thing. William Hung had a whole album.
Is that the William Hung year? Wow.
Yeah, that was the debut album. I mean, the year of William Hung was the year before. The debut album. The Dresden Dolls, who I believe we mentioned last week, their debut album was this week. Yep. Before we got on, Dan mentioned Hawthorne Heights. Their debut album was this year. From first to last, the Futureheads, who are indie British band, who I have a burnt copy of this first album. Listened to it one time, was not a fan, but I still have that of all the things that have been lost over the years. Alter Bridge, is this Creed? Not quite. Jim
Fucking love
Jones.
Creed.
Jim Jones, Census Fails, Arcade Fire, Minnie Driver. I did not realize released an album, but she did. It was in 2004.
So did Robert Downey Jr. Which I
I'm
didn't
gonna have
know
to take a
until-
listen to that.
No, you don't need to. I can assure you don't need to. I went down that rabbit hole.
Modest Yahoo's debut album was this year, and he's been a
As it was
stain
that
on
early.
the world. He's been a stain on the world since then. Grizzly Bear, a band I want to pretend I love, much like how I mentioned a couple weeks ago, is the Walkman. I actually do love a couple Grizzly Bear tracks, and I've seen them live. They're fine live, but I've spent too much money on albums for Grizzly Bear that I don't put on the record player. Gwen Stefani's solo debut, Lindsay Lohan, and I think the two best debut albums this year, John Legend and Natasha Bedingfield, whose debut album was this year, and it was phenomenal.
Indeed.
Also, her older brother's second album was released this year. Did you know she had an older brother or that he had made music? I did not either.
Daniel Bedingfield, yeah, got to get through this.
Yeah, the song was like massively popular.
And If You're Not the One, acoustic was absolutely incredible. That was my high school jam.
Missed them. Will miss them for the rest of my life. I don't.
The Chipmunks do a cover of Daniel Bedingfield in like the beginning of the movie, don't they?
In the first one,
Yeah.
I don't remember that. I went to the midnight showing of that film.
I actually love the Alvin and the Chipmunks movie. It's fantastic.
The first one's good. I didn't go beyond that. Didn't feel like I needed to. But yeah, those were the debuts I saw.
Oh no, Daniel Powder. Sorry, wrong Daniel.
Yeah, that was a bad day.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think just some interesting releases. I don't think really, except for maybe John Legend and Natasha Bedingfield, I don't think these were the best albums from any of those folks. I know we've had years. Well, I guess I completely didn't mention The Killers, whose debut album was obviously this year. And that is The Killers' best album. But I think we've had some years where it was definitely the debut album was the best album for some artists. I don't think this year was necessarily it. You can argue some of them, but it was a lot of interesting artists, but I don't think anything too hits. But we'll get to some more of those songs on debut albums when we go through our list, I'm sure.
Indeed. Now, yeah, it was we had a lot of sophomore albums this year, but not a lot of notable debuts. Now, Joseph, kick us off. What were your tracks in 2004, my friend?
Okay, so I already broke my own rule. My new old rule. A weekend, I could only get it down to 13. But some of them are pretty quick because I paired them together as well. So I'm actually gonna start with The Killers, Mr. Brightside. I love this song. Like everyone loves this song, but I also think it's funny because I feel like Brandon Flowers just walked in the studio and was like, "Guys, I have this amazing verse and this amazing chorus," and they're just like, "Great." And that was it. And they just recorded it and it was done because there's only a verse and a chorus repeated for that song. Which complete opposite. I know I'm jumping a year real quick. Fall Out Boy in 2005, when they were recording, their producers told them they would never make it big because their bass line was too heavy and they weren't singable enough. And they're like, well, fuck you, we're going to do it anyway. And of course, they also got massive from that album. So I just think it's funny. Two different approaches. We're going to make the single most digestible song that's ever been recorded. And we're going to just say no to our producers and make not easily digested songs to them. I mean, they were, but My Chemical Romance also released, I think their second album this year. I'm Not Okay, I Promise is on it. This is a band that I've mentioned it on this podcast before, that when I was in this time period, I was very selective about the music I listened to because I didn't want people to judge me. My Chemical Romance is one of those bands that I have since gone back and I love them now, but did not listen to them at the time. Two I'm going to group together, Under Oath and Hawthorne Heights. Under Oath released Reinventing Your Exit, and then Hawthorne Heights, Ohio is for Lovers was this year. And those were two songs that they were kind of the first time I had heard a song that was like, or bands that were heavy on like screaming and stuff, that I was like, wow, this is great. And then I left them for many years and then came back later. Breaking Benjamin's sophomore album was this year, probably the most successful of them. I think there were 3 singles off of this. Although Diary of Jane was a more successful single, this album was more successful. Sooner or Later and So Cold were both massive hits off of that album that I really love. Ben Queller, I think this was his sophomore solo album. He had
So the one with Sundress on it, right?
Before. Huh?
Was this the one with Sundress on it?
Sundress is the next album, I believe.
Oh, gotcha.
This is the one with My Apartment, which is my favorite Ben Queller song. For some reason, there's just something about a song that literally he just sings about going and hiding in his apartment when he needs to get away from things that just resonates with me very deeply. Modest Mouse, this is probably like their 4th one. Float On, this is the only Modest Mouse song I could name you, but in a similar vein, but on the opposite of the Under Oath Hawthorne Heights thing. Modest Mouse, this song managed to keep kind of that feel of indie music, but it had a lot of pop appeal to it too. And that was one of the things that I really appreciated about that song. Again, only Modest Mouse song I could name you off the top of my head, but Rise Against, second album this year. We mentioned Swing Life Away last week because their first album was last year, but I prefer Paper Wings off of this album. It's a wonderful song. This was the Used album I ever really listened to. I kind of got away from them after this one, but they've got some really amazing music on this album. All That I've Got is a great song. Lunacy Fringe is one of my favorite all-time songs by them. And then on the reissue, they did a cover of Under Pressure with My Chemical Romance. Some people hate it because Under Pressure is one of those things. You can't touch music that's by Queen or David Bowie, blah, blah, blah. Get your heads out of your asses. It's still a good cover of it. Not as good as the original, but it's still great. Green Day, American Idiot. This album as a whole, not good.
Thank you.
The hits off of this album were straight garbage. American Idiot was like funny when it first came out because it was like, political, hit the right. But it's not a good song. Holiday's a trash song. Boulevard of Broken Dreams is a trash song.
Thank you.
But that being said, there are some good songs on that album. I really enjoy Jesus of Suburbia. I love that it's broken up. I like all different styles that song is done in, all 5 of them. And I really like Extraordinary Girl as well.
When that album came out, I said it was trash, and everybody was like shitting on me for it. I'm like, you're just mad at our government. What's going on right now? You don't actually like these songs. And it's trash, and it doesn't hold up now either. Like when you listen to it, so it was not the Green Day that I had come to love.
Well, they peaked with Warning, so everything afterwards is going to be bad.
I hate that song too. Yes,
Warning's not the best song, but the album is fantastic.
I don't know, and I even like again, like Wake Me Up When September Ends is annoying. But again, that the ones I mentioned, I even like. I'm blanking on the names now. I was just looking at it, but whatever, we'll move on. Reliant K released an album this year. My favorite Reliant K song is on there. Who I Am Hates Who I've Been. Another song that kind of resonates a lot with me because I talk about all the time how I was an asshole years ago, and me now would probably beat the shit out of myself from years ago because I was a terrible person. And you grow up and you learn, right? James Blunt's debut was this year. And I added this for 2 reasons. One, because I actually just love You're Beautiful and Wise Men. I think they're awesome songs and they're fun to sing. And bonus, Amanda hates them. She absolutely cannot stand James Blunt's voice. And so I will randomly sing this song to her. And my impression of James Blunt is pretty close because he also can't sing.
Back to Bedlam was such a banger of an album, though. I absolutely love it.
And it was massive. And it's still, James Blunt is still massive in the UK. He doesn't get a lot of love here, but he's massive back home. I think I skipped one. Oh, Chevelle. One of their albums was out this year. One of my favorite Chevelle song. Again, their last album did better with Send the Pain Below and The Red. But Vitamin R, Leading Us Along, is the best Chevelle song. And something about them just being weird music, almost like science fiction-y sounding at times. I love Chevelle. And we're going to get to now my favorite song of the year. William Shatner released a spoken word album this year, produced and co-written by Ben Folds, so you know the music is banging for it. But there's a couple of really great songs. Has Been is hilarious. That's Me Trying is beautiful and touching. And then, of course, their cover of Pulp's Common People is the best version of that song of all of the covers that have come out. And if you think you don't like spoken word albums, listen to Common People and learn that you are wrong, because that is the best song from this year.
Holy shit. All right. Did not see that one coming at all, nor have I ever heard it. So I will put it on my homework list.
Listen to it.
It's
so
crazy
good.
you haven't heard it is the issue here.
So
I'm really not a William Shatner fan, like on any front. So that's I probably avoided it.
the way you should listen to that
my.
song is start with Pulp's version. It's not bad. It's just different.
Mhm.
Listen to My Chemical Romance's version. It's very similar, but a tiny bit better. And then listen to William Shatner's version.
I'll definitely check it out.
I'm intrigued.
Yeah, definitely intrigued. I think my homework tonight after this recording will be to check that out.
Well, and what Joe didn't mention was Henry Rollins does the chorus of Common People with him, I believe.
Nice.
Ben Folds is on the album. Like, obviously he produces it, but he sings on there. Amy Grant is on That's Me Trying, I believe. She does.
It's really well produced. The music is super well made. And again, anything Ben Folds touches is probably going to come out to be good music. He brings in the correct people to help him out with some stuff. And truthfully, I love Common People. It's a song I listen to probably more than most things.
I'm actually excited to check this out. And it was for copyright. I'd pull it up and put it on right now. So Joseph, he introduced something in my life. Awesome. So we're kicking off with Common People by William Shatner for 2004. Now, Ellen, I know that you have a list that is somehow Celine free.
Oh my God.
I was wondering where you're going to take us on this journey.
It is very Celine free, unfortunately. So, like I mentioned earlier, something I did when kind of deciding what year I was interested in was I looked at my CD collection, which for some reason I still have. So that year, to talk about Josh Groban for just a little bit. So his sophomore album would come out in 2003. In 2004 came the release of a couple songs off that track. One of them being the highly hated You Raise Me Up.
Speaking of which, when I used to walk past Ellen at work, I would sing that to her.
Yeah, those were the days. Not a highlight of the year for me, but I mean, that song was just everywhere. My school chorus did it. I think the priest in my church sang it once, and it was just all over the place. But I think one of my favorite songs from him that was released that year is called Remember When It Rained. I would recommend that for anyone. Also that year, Kelly Clarkson's sophomore album Breakaway was released, which had, Since You've Gone, Behind Those Hazel Eyes, and just I was jamming to that. I'd say around this time in 2004, I was 13/14, so 7th and 8th grade. And I think this is when I kind of went through a strong country music phase. So Shania Twain's Greatest Hits came out that year, and I was listening to that all the time. And then I know one of the commenters mentioned Live Like You Were Dying by Tim McGraw. So he had an album by the same name that year that is also dear to my heart. So in terms of singles that were released that year, I think some of my top ones would be Whiskey Lullaby, which is a duet with Brad Paisley and Alison Krauss, just beautifully sad country song. Another highlight is Yeah by Usher. Hearing those two opening notes, I think it's just a recognizable tune. A song and band that I totally forgot about until I was doing more research on the year was Heaven by Los Lonely Boys. I have no idea what happened to Los Lonely Boys after 2004, but I love that song back then. Alicia Keys, If I Ain't Got You is up there for me. I also went through a strong Ryan Cabrera phase during those years. Couldn't find his album, so I must have gotten rid of it years ago. But
I still have it downstairs.
yeah, he had a single, On the Way Down, that was a jam back then.
Forgot about that song.
It's an amazing track. That whole album was great start to finish. He was actually a really budding singer-songwriter until Ashley.
I would not have been able to tell you if I saw the person's name. I would not have been able to match him with that song. But okay,
yeah, pretty good stuff. And he dated Ashley Simpson for a time, right?
He was on a huge trajectory for his career, and then she dumped him like after the reality show, and that was. So then he dyed his hair black, grew it long, and started trying to get into like pop punk, and that was just the end of him.
I see. Okay, good for him.
Yeah.
My More from Evanescence was released as a single that year. Beautiful song. Goodness, my list is so incredibly long. I have Run by Snow Patrol. I Go Back by Kenny Chesney. I also believe 2004. I could be wrong, but I think that Jones released her debut single Sunrise that year. That's a highlight for me. I have about 20 other songs, but I'm going to say those are my top.
Okay, but what's the top pick?
I'm ill for this. I'm going to go.
Do it.
Oh, you know what I forgot? Okay. So Keith Urban's
There it is.
in the States came out that year called Be Here. I can't believe I totally forgot about this. But so there are a few songs released from that album that year. But there was one single that is probably my favorite 2004 from Keith Urban called You'll Think of Me. That was off of his sophomore album, which came out a few years prior. But You Think of Me I love that song. I think it won Keith Urban his first Grammy. So I'm going to say that was my top song of 2004.
That was actually a great song too. That was everywhere, regardless of the type of music that was playing. And somehow it topped. I remember they used to like Song of the Week, whatever, on the Point at Brockport. Somehow it was the top song at a college radio station, which is for a country song, that's pretty big.
Yeah, especially at college radio.
It's a big crossover hit.
Yes.
So college radio tends to be a lot of like very
alternative
underground music, like not even just alternative. Like our college radio, like I didn't recognize a single band on any of the records they had in the studio. So I was like, but Groove Shark works, right? And so I just played stuff off Groove Shark, but
so Ellen's bringing, I think that was our first country song of the year, I believe.
I really like the mix actually too. I mean, we have now kind of all set in our way in how we pick music to bring up, and like mine is only the album released that year, right? So like looking at singles and stuff, it's a different way to do it, and I like the mix of bringing in guests and stuff, and what your thought process is in picking songs of a year.
I was wondering if we were going to get Keith Urban from you for the year, by the way, since there was no Celine. It was between Keith Urban or Josh Groban in my head. So,
well, you guys are talking about what a crossover hit that is, but I didn't listen to the radio at all, so I've never heard this song. I still don't really ever listen to the radio unless I'm like in the car with someone.
It's actually a really well-written song. Really simple musical number, but great lyrics. Honestly, the writing's pretty strong on it.
Agreed.
I also couldn't tell you what that song is.
Well, then you have some homework.
Yes.
So Gregory,
Keith Urban.
what are your offerings for 2004, my friend?
Well, since Joe finished with Shatner, I'm gonna start with Shatner. This album was great. The big one for me that Joe didn't mention was It Hasn't Happened Yet. This album, you wouldn't think based on his persona, but Shatner is a super retrospective person and introspective, and this album, like, it's just seeped in that stuff. So he wrote most of the lyrics, obviously Common People, which is a cover he did not. So this is Shatner. He was a good friend of Ben Folds. So when the studio asked him to do another album, because he hadn't done one since the one with Rocket Man, and he called Ben immediately, because if Ben Folds wasn't going to work with him on it, he wasn't going to do it. So that's how it happened. And It Hasn't Happened Yet is brilliant. And Dan said he didn't like Shatner in any form, but I will give a reading recommendation here. His biography that came out, I think, in 2005, just after this album came out, is just a brilliant read. He talks about his life, like growing up in Montreal, doing Shakespeare in the Park. And then he talks about all the terrible roles he took that led to great roles. So he did a film that tackled racism that filmed in Tennessee. And it was like this intense, like they had to have security and police and everything while filming it, because guess what? The people of Tennessee did not like that they were covering racism. And I think it was the 50s. So he did like these low budget films, but these low budget films led to Star Trek. He talks about doing like Rocket Man leading to the Priceline commercials, which was a very lucrative thing for him. And so he gives the advice of just say yes. So his like motto, the reason Shatner does so many terrible projects and then will appear in a good one is because he just says yes, because you don't know what's going to lead from that. And I thought that was just really great advice from him. It's just a good read in general. The only problem with it is the trade paperback has like the rough mass market paperback, not the quality paper that's supposed to come in a trade.
Right.
So that is a disappointment in the book, but that's like a super nerdy book thing for me. But yeah, it hasn't happened yet. And then on to the Ben Folds thing. He did not release an album this year, but he released the third of EPs. And hold on a second, I just closed out of my list. Yeah,
You write it down on paper.
Yes, that's why you write it down on paper. But yeah, Ben Folds, he had 3 EPs coming out, 2 of them in 2003, Speed, Graphic, and Sunny 16, which were both great, but I didn't mention because I don't usually cover EPs. But this one had his cover of Get Your Hands Off My Woman by The Darkness, which is brilliant to hear him. Like, and he tries to sing it like he's The Darkness. And also Rent-A-Cop, which is a hilarious track. I would love to see Ben Folds write a musical based on a mall security cop. And it would be amazing. And Rocking the Suburbs could be in there as well. So I don't usually mention EPs, and both of those I think are on one of the upcoming albums, but I wanted to mention them now because we make the rules here. So whatever. Mentioned Franz Ferdinand, Take Me Out. Joe mentioned Modest Mouse. Ocean Breathe Salty and Bukowski are tracks I really love off that album. Joe mentioned Ben Queller. My Apartment is on my list as well. On My Way and The Rules are also great tracks. This is just a brilliant follow-up album from Ben Folds. Matthew Good's second solo album came out this year. The first solo album was very much like what Matthew Good sounds like now as a solo album. This kind of sounded like a bunch of tracks he hadn't put on Matthew Good band albums. In fact, he does a version of Alert Status Rad on this album that sounds exactly alike. But It's Been a While Since I Was Your Man is my favorite off this. We've mentioned The Killers. Jenny Was a Friend of Mine and Andy, You're a Star are my 2 favorite tracks off that album. But Jenny Was a Friend of Mine probably because of my dear friend Jenny Bethel, who I love. I always think of her when that song comes on. So Lit released an album this year because they were still making music there, and they have a cover of Pictures of You by The Cure that's just fantastic. Which is, I think, the 4th year in a row I've had a cover in my short list, which is bothersome, but
not to me.
Not to me.
I love my covers.
Breaking Benjamin was mentioned. So Cold, Firefly, and Breakdown are my favorite tracks off those albums. Probably my favorite Breaking Benjamin tracks. Jimmy World, Just Tonight, and Night Drive are my favorites off those. Chaos, Toronto rapper Chaos, sticking with the theme of us loving our Canadian musicians. We missed his debut album, and that's on me because it probably was listed on Wikipedia, and I completely forgot about it.
But 02?
Yeah, 02 is this one, and that had like all the superstar tracks. So we will get on that when we cover tracks we missed. But on this one, he had the Love Song, which I really liked. LL Cool J's The Definition was this year. Not the best release from LL Cool J, but Headsprung. Latter day LL Cool J, he always has like a couple tracks that are just really good, not quite vintage LL, but still fun. And Headsprung was like a club track from LL, which wasn't something he did a lot of, but it was a really fun one. Natasha Bedingfield was mentioned, Unwritten. I just love the track Unwritten. Black Keys had an album, also not a favorite Black Keys album of mine, but Girls on My Mind off that one. The Faint, I Disappear, and Dropkick the Punks are two of my favorite Faint tracks that were both released on the album this year. Mos Def's second album was this year. Ghetto Rock off that one. Cake released an album, and No Phone, which I believe was the lead single off that album. I think it's a great track. It's also not like any of the other singles Cake had released up to that point, but that is the beauty of Cake. Ted Leo had an album, Me and Mia, and Little Dawn are those. Another EP is Wolf Mother, the Australian rock band. The track Mother was on that EP this year, and I just love that track. Rufus Wainwright.
Guitar Hero fame.
That song also always sounded like it could have come out 20 years before it did.
Yes. When I saw that song was released this year, I was absolutely flabbergasted.
Yes.
I could have sworn that was 30 years older than that.
Wolf Mother is just one of those rock bands that kind of sounds timeless. Rufus Wainwright had Want One, I think, this year. The One You Love and Gay Messiah are both great tracks off of that. And then John Legend's debut album we mentioned, Get Lifted, is just a great track. And Get Lifted Again is also really great on that, but Get Lifted is slightly better. And then Elliott Smith's final album was this year. But before I get into that, I did forget to mention that My Apartment, On My Way, and The Rules, that's a three-track stretch on that album, and I think it's tracks 2 through 5.
Ooh,
and that would
track stretch.
That would be my favorite three-track stretch of that year, and the only one I thought worth mentioning. But that Elliott Smith album, I got some criticism released because it's the most polished Elliott Smith album. People are like, if he was alive, would it be this polished? But just, I mean, the whole album plays like a suicide note, which is extra tragic.
Haunting.
But my two strong stretches come out of this album. Strung Out Again is followed by A Fond Farewell, which, I mean, if that doesn't sound like a suicide album there, I don't know what does. And then Twilight and A Passing Feeling are also, I think what the most heartbreaking thing about this album is, yes, it does sound in hindsight like a suicide, but if it had come out before his passing, it would have sounded hopeful. Like, every song is slightly depressing, but there's a tinge of upbeat, things are going to get better. And I mean, that was kind of Elliott Smith's MO, and we're going to get into a couple years when the song Late by Ben Folds come out, which might be the song of the year for that year for me, but he talks about hearing Elliott was doing better.
Yeah.
Just even looking at the tracks on this earlier this morning while eating some cereal, like, I was tearing up because this album just hits me so hard. This is like the Vex Sea Change. Like, it's just an album that like instantly just brings up all the emotions. But my short list for the year, Float On, Modest Mouse. It's somehow the most and least Modest Mouse song they've ever recorded. And then Breaking Benjamin also released an EP that was the So Cold EP, and they have the So Cold live acoustic cover of that. Mm-hmm. And that is my favorite version of that song. These Words, Natasha Bedingfield, I think is my favorite track for hers. And the video for that track is just brilliant. Also on that John Legend debut album, Ordinary People. Like, if you want to talk about simple tracks, just John Legend singing over the piano. Like, what more do you need? There's a lot of production on all John Legend albums, but those tracks were just him and the piano.
Yep.
Coast to Coast, another Elliott Smith track. Maybe the most upbeat of them and just so beautiful. But my song of the year is Pretty Ugly Before by Elliott Smith. So you guys can tell, like, that album just hits me. Just that song wrecks me. And then once again, still has that tinge of upbeat, just the title, Pretty, parentheses, Ugly Before. Just, I said genius is used too much, but Elliott Smith, he was a musical genius. It's unfortunate that he couldn't get the help he needed. He couldn't get right with himself, because I would have loved to have heard him progress musically. But as a side note to that, we talked last week about seeking help. And I've mentioned on this podcast numerous times and all other platforms about what a big wrestling fan I am. And so the WWE faction, The New Day, has a podcast, and they devoted this week their episode to mental health. And I think that was a brilliant episode. I'll share it in the links or in the comments under this, the link to the episode. But the three of them talk about their own struggles with mental health, including Big E, who is now WWE World Champion. That was like the day that podcast was posted, he won the championship. But he talks about his lifelong battle with depression. Xavier Woods, who's also like a G4 host and big in the video game community, he talks about his battles. And Kofi Kingston talks just about never wanting to seek help because he felt he had to be strong for others. And it's important because I know there's the stigma of men not seeking help and not talking about their mental health. So to hear these three, especially these three Black men, talk about having to seek help and wanting to seek help, and then they bring on a mental health professional to talk to, and they talk about like the tools to help your own mental health. And she said something that was brilliant about it, that she wishes she dealt with patients that were just coming in for a checkup before they needed it.
Yep.
Just to fine tune. And I thought that was just brilliant to hear these gentlemen talk so vulnerably, and then to know they're not professionals and to bring in a professional to talk about it with. I think that was important. Like, we talk about seeking help and talking about it. So to hear that, I think that was important. And it just so happened to coincide when we were talking about one of the most impactful albums on me personally, and one of the most impactful artists on me personally, who really saw a tragic end. So
mental health is mental wealth. And, it's interesting that you mentioned the Elliott Smith, because I do my mental health lesson to start every semester with my freshman. I just got done talking about Elliott Smith and Juice WRLD. And the calls for help. People celebrate the music, but they don't realize the correlation between the help they actually need in the moment. I mentioned Chester and Chris and everybody. So it's I'm glad you mentioned that, because there's so much music that we connect to where there are cries for help and nobody listened. So a lot of people say like it's their therapy, but it's really not. It's them pouring it out to nobody on the other end. And so they're not actually addressing it in other ways. So big mention there. This was a year where I was looking back on my own depression, things like that, because of the Elliott Smith stuff, because he's somebody I kind of just really that resonated with me. A lot of people didn't hear his music until way after the fact. And so he's somebody I kind of listened to the whole time. So definitely revisited that album quite a few times this past week. It's not my favorite of his, but it's one that I connected to, I think, on a lot of different levels. When I had to break down my tracks, and I actually have a 3-track stretch this week, Gregory.
Ooh,
which is very different out of my box. But
listen, Joe bit my territory a couple weeks ago. Now you're biting it this week. Damn, guys.
I was wondering if you would mention it.
I purposely avoided because Chevelle has a great one too. I mentioned the clincher in Vitamin R leading us along, but in between that is Get Some, and that 3-track stretch is real good too. But I was like, I've already stepped on the 2-track, the 3-track territory a couple times. I'm gonna leave that one alone for this.
Listen,
year.
I don't need credit, but if like 2-track and 3-track runs become a thing people start talking about, and like, I'll know it was me.
I think this is my shortest list yet for 2004. And I don't know if it's because of quality or it's just I really liked what I liked. And this is when I started making playlists for all the parties. So it's becoming much easier for me. But 1-2 Step from Sierra, absolutely love that track. 1985 from Bowling for Soup. Not one that I really enjoyed much, but was a huge track that year. Accidentally in Love from Counting Crows was kind of everywhere for no reason. All Downhill
because it was in Shrek.
Yeah,
Diesel off of Shrek 2.
Yeah,
yes,
I just
classic.
After seeing them in concert on 9/11 a few years ago and watching how much of a dick he was, Counting Crows is nothing for me besides the song Colorblind. All Downhill from Here, Newfound Glory. The Killers, I really enjoyed all the things that I've done and Smile Like You Mean It. Those 2 tracks are great. The whole album was a damn masterpiece, to be honest, start to finish. I know you guys aren't big Dispatch fans with Bats in the Belfry. My favorite song of theirs, Elias and Flying Horses, all came out that year, and that whole album is just a banger for me.
What are we, a year away from their retirement or breakup?
Which one? Because I went to their 3 last shows that were about 6 years apart each. So Bless the Broken Road from Rascal Flatts, which I thought for sure Melon would throw out there.
It was on my list of like 40 songs.
Broken from Seether, which also was done with Amy Lee at one point too. Also on the Punisher soundtrack. Love that soundtrack. From Usher, we had Burn, Confessions Part 2, My Boo, which that track is always fun. Modest Mouse, that hasn't been mentioned. I had Bury Me With It. I absolutely love that song. I think, Gregory, you said Oceans Breathe Salty, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which was the second single, right?
Yes. Yeah.
And I think people heard that and like, that's not Float On, and just
yes.
that was the end of the mainstream
That was
Modest
me.
Mouse. But
I think a year later, I was like the only person calling and requesting Modest Mouse still, because I love them since Antarctica. So Drop It Like It's Hot from Snoop. Then we get to Jimmy Eat World, which had my 3-track stretch there with Just Tonight, Work, and Kill. Work and Kill are two of my favorite Jimmy Eat World songs. But that also had Drugs Are Me on it and Pain, which Pain was kind of their popular track that year. Futures is one of my favorite albums of all time. Got to see him play in concert, just absolutely love it. Duality from Slipknot, Fall to Pieces from Velvet Revolver, Helena and the Ghost of You from My Chemical Romance. I think this is the last My Chemical Romance I actually liked on this album, and then I was just kind of done with them. I think they're only like one or two after this. I just couldn't stand them. Holla Back Girl from Gwen Stefani. I Don't Want to Know from Mario Winans. The Diddy prodigies were kind of coming out of the woodworks with some tracks here. I Don't Want You Back, Fuck It from Iman, which somehow became a low-key breakup song for so many people that year, even though it's such trash. I Just Want to Live from Good Charlotte, which was actually a really fun song as the world was forgetting about Benji and Joel. Just Lose It, like Toy Soldiers from Eminem. I actually really enjoy like Toy Soldiers. It was nice to see Eminem get serious for a moment and really address some stuff going on in his own way. Leave, Get Out from JoJo. She every now and then tries to make a comeback with these little summer tours. So I feel bad that the last couple of years she's been bogged down, because there's a comeback in her somewhere. Let Me Love You from Mario. Locked Up and Lonely from Akon. I rocked that album start to finish, that Trouble album. I listened to it nonstop for months. I think the last Incubus album I liked, Megalomaniac and Talk Shows on Mute, were on here. At one point, they were actually my favorite band, and then Brandon Boyd went in a completely different direction with his writing, and the songs didn't really resonate with me anymore. My band from D12, because they just needed a shout out at some point in their lives, and I figured this would be the place where our one listener is also the one who's on it, so it's not going to get any listens. My Happy Ending and Nobody's Home from Avril. I am an Avril stan and will always mention her. My Place and Over from Nelly. This is when Nelly started. He did a little crossover with Tim McGraw there, and this year he released a country album, so do you, Nelly. Pieces of Me from Ashley Simpson, which my buddy Ben Covert and his band covered in a punk acoustic version that to this day is on every playlist I make. It was amazing. Also, shout out to Ashley for her lip syncing wonder. Salt Shaker from the Yin Yang Twins, because why not? And then there was Scars from Papa Roach, which I didn't really enjoy at the time. I was really sick of it because, I'd be out at the gym every 5 seconds, just everywhere. But so now I listen to it, I like it a little better. Scotty Doesn't Know from Lustra. That song is absolutely incredible. And anytime I meet somebody named Scott, it's in my head. So sorry, Scots. Slow Jams from Twista, which was brought to us by Kanye in a lot of ways. We have High and Tears and Rain from James Blunt. Like both of those songs a lot on that album. That album is absolutely incredible to me. Some Beach and The Baby from Blake Shelton. A little bit of country thrown in there. One of the few U2 songs I still like. Sometimes you can't make it on your own. State of the Union from Rise Against. Trouble from Ray LaMontagne. I absolutely love that song, love his voice, just everything. Simple Plan gave us How Could This Happen to Me and Welcome to My Life, which I think they kind of disappeared after that. Vindicated from Dashboard, such a banger of a track. I love Chris Carrabba's voice. It's just always there for me. And then When the Sun Goes Down from Kenny Chesney, another country offering for that year. I think this is probably my most country heavy year. And what is it, 4 songs?
That was exactly Cracker, wasn't it?
Yeah, unfortunately, but it existed. So then we come to my final. I had a final 7, I think. So I had White Houses from Vanessa Carlton. Absolutely love that song. And in my friend group, we jammed it. We sing it midnight, 1 in the morning when we're wasted. The Lattice Modest Yahoo I liked, King Without a Crown. Just love that track. Rise Against, Swing Life Away. That was just such a great song, still is. Ordinary People from John Legend. I fell in love with that song and that album when I heard him. Somebody Told Me from the Killers, and Work from Jimmy Eat World. And I think my favorite song for that year had to be Ordinary People. And I think it's simply because it put somebody on the map who shouldn't have been there based on what was popular. And somehow he snuck his way in there and just kind of joined the mainstream without joining the mainstream in a lot of ways. And so props to John Legend. And I mean, it's, when you think about some of the music we have now, you know, like Bruno, Silk Sonic, Anderson .Paak, you know, they're very eclectic, but very interesting musical styles. I don't know that they would have been as successful without somebody like that kind of coming and be like, you could be totally different and do your thing like this. So I got to go Ordinary People, John Legend.
EGOT award winner, John Legend.
Let's put some respect on his name.
So you mentioned Fuck It by Iman, which reminded me of the response that I had completely forgotten was released this year. Fuck You Right Back by rapper Frankie. And it is so much better than the first one. And they're still both so garbage. It's not even funny. But we used to listen, because when I was out at Thule, there's no radio, there's nothing like that. There's barely internet. So we had to listen to burned CDs, essentially, like going up to site.
Oh, yeah.
And that was on one of the CDs that was in the crew truck. And so me and one of my crew partners, he is a Lance Corporal in the Canadian Royal Air Force. And we used to just sing that song at the top of our lungs going up to the site. And it's just so bad. But I forgot it was released in 2004. So thank you for reminding me that song exists.
Yeah, quite an awful song. But it was popular for who it needed to be popular for at that time, I suppose.
The Frankie Response debuted at #1 in the UK.
Yeah, things vibe a little differently.
That's insane.
You mentioned. I'm sorry, Dan.
No, go ahead.
You'd mentioned Good Charlotte, and was it Benji that dated Hillary Duff in this time period?
I think so, because didn't Joel date
Sounds right.
Richie?
Yeah, what a weird time in pop culture. I remember, well, because Hillary Duff released 2 albums this year. One of them was a soundtrack for a movie she was in, and one of hers was her own.
Was that the Cinderella soundtrack?
Yeah, it was the Cinderella soundtrack.
I should.
But I remember maybe it was like the MTV Music Video Awards, because this may have been like the last year where they were slightly relevant to me. Her mentioning like liking bands like The Faint, and that always stuck out to me, because I was like, wait, you listen to The Faint, or does your boyfriend listen to The Faint and you mentioned it to sound cool? And like, who knows? I want to believe she listens to The Faint. I actually like Hillary Duff as a person, so I want to believe she's like rocking out to Dance Macabre on her turntable at the same time I am. So
here's to hoping How I Met Your Father's any good.
I have high hopes for it.
We shall
Me
see.
too.
We shall see. But we've had a very eclectic year here for our favorites, and I love that. I think it's pretty awesome. And Ellen, it's been great having you, and it's awesome how you give us your very thought out lists each week. So I'm glad to hear it presented to the world in your voice instead of my gruff old man voice. So thank you for joining us. It's definitely appreciated.
Thank you for having me.
Of course.
And if we ever do a Disney soundtrack one, you are welcome.
Absolutely. You better make it now.
I feel like Disney soundtrack would have to be like a separate series once we're done with the Ballads.
Yes. Ellen is the queen.
There's
of
no
Disney
contest.
Music.
It's a Goofy movie. Eye to eye.
Oh my God.
Done. Tevin Coleman or Campbell.
So we've already recorded the episode, folks. We'll just edit that and send it out as a short.
It's done. Get out. Move.
I love Eye to Eye, but I don't think it's my favorite track off that soundtrack. So
That's the only one I remember, unfortunately.
But Ellen, yes, thank you for joining us.
I could sing that movie from beginning to end without stopping.
Well, that might just be
that could be its own episode.
We are skipping 2005, and Joe is going to sing the Goofy movie soundtrack.
Yeah, good luck getting the rights to that.
Ellen, before we wrap things up, do you have anything to plug while you're here? Any shout outs?
I think to echo what you folks were talking about last week about mental health, I think, especially during this crazy time we're having with COVID and everything else, just make sure you're taking time to take care of yourself. And granted, it is important to reach out to others around you to see how they're doing, but if you don't take care of yourself, then you can't do that. So practice self-care when you can.
Well said. Joseph, my friend. Anything
Shout out to my fantasy football team, False Positives. I took down the league last year, picked up right where I left off, scoring the most points for week 1. So let's get some.
Nice.
I
Gregory,
want
my
to
friend.
remind you, I'm pretty sure I scored the most points last year in week 1, and I did not come anywhere close to winning. So,
Well, you also lost Christian McCaffrey first, like 2 weeks later or something.
That'll
and
do
who's
it.
on your team this year?
This is his year of health.
Any plugs for you, Gregory?
Yeah, on Hulu, there's this documentary that I mentioned in the Cool Points newsletter this past weekend, but it's called Minding the Gap. It's done by this guy Bing Lau, and it's him and the guys he was skating with when he was a high schooler in Rockford, Illinois. It's super emotional, and I know like you don't necessarily think skateboarding documentary is super emotional, but it's just how like they escape the home life issues they're dealing with through skateboarding, and then even as they're looking back at and following their current, also the economic issues that are plaguing a lot of middle America and small town America, no matter what I guess portion of the country it is. But it's just this really emotional documentary, and Bing just manages to capture everything so well, and it's amazing how open these folks are with the camera. Doesn't matter how they're going to come across, because one of the guys comes across as a giant dickhead, and he's just open about it like the whole time. So it's just a really, really well done. I think it was 3 years ago that it come out, but it also closes with the Mountain Goats this year, which we will definitely get into in the future. And you can see Joe smirking because this is a song that comes up way too much in my life, but like it's such a wonderful emotional track. And the fact that it closes with it on the guys is to kind of sum up where they're at. I can't recommend this documentary enough. Other than that, just Facebook, Cool Points, follow me there, read the newsletter. So yeah.
Definitely follow the Cool Points. I'm a bit behind because of work, but I will be catching up as well. My shout out is to JayPlaysOk on Twitch, which I was worried about this. You cannot see it, but I'll put it in the comments. Dear friend of mine, her Twitch is taking off. She actually just finally got monetized, and it's going very well for her. So JayPlaysOk, that's JayPlaysOk. Give her a watch, give her a follow. Zoe watches her videos and loves it. Check it out, all about supporting folks and growing together. Also check out Gary B, the Casual Comic Guy's YouTube page. He's been doing a lot to grow YouTube channel communities, and he's such a great local guy here. I love every chance I get to talk to him at the local comic shop. And to echo Ellen, just be good to yourself and take care of yourself in any way you need, whether it's music, talking, or anything else. And as we mentioned last week, if you need to reach out, we're here. You got to do it in the comments. Find us on social media. Hit us up. I actually got 2 phone calls last week, unrelated to this, but just people I hadn't talked to in years who just needed somebody. I'm always happy to be that person, not because it's a good time, but because it means that you have somebody to talk to. So be good to yourself, be good to others. And thank you for joining us this week. Much love, everybody.